The world loves a good underdog story, whether it be in NASCAR, any other form of motorsports, or just sports in general. Daniel LaRusso and the Karate Kid, the 2007 New York Giants, or one of my personal favorite underdog stories, Andy Ruiz. After being scheduled to fight unified boxing champion Anthony Joshua, Ruiz was a 25-1 underdog, with some sports books even having his odds as high as 30-1. After being knocked down in the third round by Joshua, Ruiz countered with a knockdown of his own. Before the round was over, he knocked him down again, and in round 7, he knocked him down once more. Joshua rose to his feet before being knocked down for the fourth and final time. In one of the biggest upsets in boxing history, Andy Ruiz conquered a boxing giant. While the rematch didn't go as planned for Andy, he still managed to last all 12 rounds. He made it to the end, and as long as you make it to the end, you still have a fighting chance. The same can be said in the world of NASCAR. No matter who you are, if you put yourself in the right position after 3, 4, 5, or in some cases 600 miles, guess what? You have just as much a shot at winning as everyone else. Don't get me wrong, it's not as simple as that. There are plenty of other factors. The caliber of equipment, the caliber of the team, the circumstances of pit strategy. Everything has to go right. And if it doesn't, you can find yourself in the wall, way out in the back, or coming devastatingly close to victory. The majority of the teams in NASCAR that find success do so on a fairly regular basis, but every now and again, the underdog gets his time in the spotlight. And while there's been many underdogs in the history of NASCAR, one story always sticks out to me. A story of a man with a heart just as big as his stature, a journeyman racer just trying to provide for his family. And just as he had thought his luck had run dry, a trip to Daytona would change his fortunes. This is the story of Tiny Lund.
How does it feel to be a winner, Tiny?
Greatest thrill of my life.
On November 14th, 1929, in Harlan, Iowa, Dwayne Lewis Lund was born. At age 15, Lund began racing motorcycles. He would briefly try out midgets and sprint cars, before eventually having to give it up. Not because he wasn't good, but due to his size. Standing at 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighing 270 pounds, he was ironically given the nickname Tiny. And while sprint cars didn't suit him, he did continue racing modifieds, and through his formative years, he earned a classy reputation. After serving in the U.S. Air Force during the Korean War, Tiny returned to racing in 1955. In his return, he headed south with a 1955 Chevrolet to Lehigh, Arkansas to try his hand at NASCAR. His first race ended prematurely in a violent crash. On lap 65, Lund's car flipped end over end, and during the crash, his seatbelt broke. He was left battered, bruised, and with a broken arm. Tiny would soon recover, and would push forward into 1956. He would drive Pontiacs for A.L. Bumgarner, and would also team up with Gus Hosmuller, earning a best finish of 4th. For 1957, he would continue driving Bumgarner's Pontiacs, along with an Oldsmobile fielded by Petty Enterprises. While Tiny was proving his worth as a steady hand, a journeyman willing to take any ride available to support his family, he began showing off his talent. In a race at the Cleveland County Fairgrounds, Lund qualified on the pole. He would then lead 136 of the race's 200 laps, before a broken axle would end his race with just 14 laps remaining. Throughout 1957 and 1958, Tiny would earn 5 poles. But like most privateers and journeyman racers, he was struggling to foot the bill. With whatever winnings he had left over from racing, he bought land. And in between starts, he owned and operated a popular lakeside fish camp to continue making money. In 1959, Lund began funding his racing career out of his own pocket, and by the end of 1962, his well had run dry. In one last attempt, he headed to Daytona in February of 1963. With only 17 cents to his name and no car, Tiny hoped to find a ride for the Daytona 500. On February 14, 1963, Wood Brothers driver and close friend of Tiny, Marvin Panch, was testing a Ford-powered Maserati for the annual Daytona 3-hour sports car race. Traveling around the high banks, the car went airborne and flipped multiple times before landing on its roof. When the car caught fire, Tiny and 4 others ran to assist Panch. As they were attempting to turn the car back over, the the fire grew rapidly. Two-time NASCAR Sportsman champion Bill Wimble would state in that moment, he thought Panch was gone. Through sheer strength and adrenaline, Lund pulled Panch out of the burning wreckage and saved the life of his friend. Though Panch survived, the burns he suffered in the fiery crash would prevent him from racing in the Daytona 500 just 10 days away. While in his hospital bed, he made the suggestion that Tiny should take his ride in the 21 because of his heroic efforts. The Wood brothers figured what better driver to fill in than the one that saved the life of theirs. Behind the wheel of the 21, Tiny was 4th fastest in qualifying. After finishing 6th in his qualifying race, he would start the Daytona 500 in 12th. With 11 drivers starting ahead of them, the Wood brothers knew they would have to do something different than the rest of the field. Their strategy was to make one less pit stop for fuel than everyone else. In order for their strategy to pan out, Tiny would have to draft in behind others for the entire race. After the start of the race was delayed for heavy rain, the first 10 laps would be run under caution. Fred Lorenzen and Ned Jarrett controlled the majority of the race. Lorenzen led with Jarrett drafting behind. All the while, Lund made his way through the field one by one. With 7 laps to go, Lorenzen heads down pit road. After leading the majority of the race, he was unable to save fuel. A lap later, Tiny and Ned are neck and neck at the line. The next time around, Jarrett has to come to pit road. With Tiny in the lead, the question remains in the air. Does he have enough? On the final lap, Tiny says a prayer. At the beginning of the month, he showed up to Daytona with nothing but hope. Hoping that he could just find a ride for the race. Hoping that he could find a way to provide for his family. I imagine he hoped for a miracle. And coming out of turn 4, there was nobody else in sight.
Tremendous amount of credit for the job of engineering they did here today. The checkered flag is out. And here he comes.
Have just won $25,000. What will you folks do with it?
Pay our bills.
Pay our bills and add to our fishing camp.
I say I was out of gas for the last 4 lessons. You were out of gas when you took the checkered flag?
Yes, sir.
In the years that followed, Lund and the 4 others who saved Panch's life would be given the Carnegie Hero Medal. Tiny would earn an additional 2 Grand National victories. However, his total of 3 Cup Series wins should, in all honesty, be 5. For context, NASCAR used to have a series known as the Grand American Series. Compared to the Chevelles, Torinos, and Chargers raced in the Grand National Series, the Grand American Series ran pony cars. Long story short, sometimes the Grand National Series had races that were short on entries, so NASCAR would then invite the Grand American cars to compete with the Grand National cars. However, NASCAR had deemed if a Grand American car won a Grand National race, they would not be credited with the win. As a matter of fact, the race would just have no winner. First place points wouldn't be credited and the race would just be a wash. The more well-known instance of this was Bobby Allison's win at Bowman Gray Stadium. If this win were to count, it would break the tie in the all-time Cup Series wins list between Allison and Darrell Waltrip. But what isn't as well known is that in 1971, Tiny Lund won 2 Grand National races driving a Grand American car, once at Hickory and again at North Wilkesboro, both times behind the wheel of a Chevrolet Camaro. While Racing Reference has Lund's win total listed as 5, it's not official. Even then, the wins were still counted in the manufacturer's standings for the season. While these wins aren't counted towards Tiny's Cup win total, he definitely found a home in the Grand American Series. Out of the 109 series races, Lund won 41 of them, and out of the 4 full season championships for the series, Lund won 3. The Grand American Series would then become the Grand National East Division. The series only ran 2 seasons, and Tiny would win the final championship there as well. While he continued to have success in the lower levels, Tiny was still a journeyman in the Cup Series, despite his obvious talent. And in August of 1975, he drove home after failing to qualify for the Talladega 500. After a rain delay pushed the race back a week, the crew chief for Grant Adcox had passed away. Adcox withdrew, and Tiny was then in the race. On August 17th, Tiny Lund strapped into his race car. Tragically, it would be for the last time. On lap 7, Lund and J.D. McDuffie collided. As they spun down the backstretch, the field ducked high and low. Terry Link, with nowhere to go, crashed into the driver's side door of Lund. 2 spectators and driver Walter Ballard were able to pull Link out of his burning car, and were also able to revive him. Track rescue teams pulled Lund from his wrecked race car. As a result of massive chest and internal injuries, Tiny Lund passed away. In the stories that have surfaced about Tiny in the years since his passing, all have described him as a fun-loving guy with a heart of gold, a gentle giant that shared more characteristics with a teddy bear than a grizzly. But being a teddy bear didn't mean Tiny was weak. The man was tougher than a $2 steak. In 1968, Tiny crashed at a tire test in Charlotte, and after staying a week in the hospital, he was back at the very next race at Martinsville.
Without having driven here even yet this year, you have had some back problems, not from that.
Well, we had a little accident, tire testing last week at, week 4 last at Charlotte, and I spent last week in the hospital on traction, and so I don't know if I survive this track, well, I'm better shape than I think I am.
While Tiny may have passed away, his spirit still lives on. The grit of an underdog still remains. And what better team embodies the spirit of Tiny Lund than the one he was behind the wheel of that February day? The Wood brothers may not be the powerhouse they used to be. They certainly are underdogs in every sense. But as the saying goes, every dog has its day.
Yes, sir, a duel right to the finish. And it's Tiny Lund.
Final time off 4. Trevor Bain playing defense. He's out in front at age 20. He's going to win. But here comes Harrison Benton for the Wood brothers. Benton walks. He gets back up. Comes to the line.
To everything.